What's happening, everybody? Thank you for being here at All Access Live with Kevin Rankin. I have to tell you, I'm excited that I'm so excited for my next guest that we just got talking and got chatty and didn't realize that I hadn't yet gone live yet. So we get to do a little practice run. Listen, before we even get started with any of that, if you do anything, if you came here from any place other than YouTube, do me a favor, go to the link below, go to youtube.com/access, at Access Kevin, and subscribe to the channel. You can become a member, and you can also hit the like. Make sure that you share this. If you become a member, you'll have access to all sorts of exclusive benefits that are only privy to those people that have become members. So go to youtube.com/@accesskevin. And also thank you so much to 5-Star Guitars based in Oregon. If you're a guitarist and you're interested in repairs or lessons or accessories or great deals on guitars, go to YouTube. Go to 5starguitars.com/allaccesslive, and everything you see there, you're going to have 15% off by using the promo code of allaccess15. And also, there's no sales tax in Oregon, so you're going to save a ton of dough and save have a great opportunity to support an organization based in Oregon that has supported me. So, speaking of Oregon, my next guest, like I said, he's a documentary filmmaker, an amazing contributor to the creative sources in Oregon, and I got him here in his lovely studio in Oregon. Now, thanks for being patient and rolling through that again, buddy.
Yeah,
Brett
no
Eichenberger.
worries. Yeah. The problem is, though, Kevin, is in that first rehearsal, I gave away all my secrets. I'm not sure I'm going to do that now.
Well, you know what?
I can only do that once.
Yeah, you know what? So the people that just got here, they're unfortunately not getting a chance to have seen all the evidence that you put forth, and so
Yeah,
maybe we'll have to save that for a future. But I do have this guy here, so at least
you have that guy.
yeah.
I was actually holding up the leg of a Sasquatch, but I'm too tired to hold it up now, so it's just right off camera.
It's pretty amazing that that's got that much girth around. That they're a lot larger than they look on stickers. So
yeah, no, they're big. They're big, but in all seriousness,
yeah,
they are real, and we will talk about that.
Well, so one of the things that that you and I talked about as we were chatting before I went live were two sort of camps of people that you've discovered when you're doing your research. People that are Bigfoot followers. They fall into two sort of pockets, and I'd not even heard that before. So maybe you can explain that to me.
Yeah. Okay. So the whole thing with Bigfoot is kind of a mystery to folks that are only familiar with seeing them on bumper stickers and T-shirts, and of course here in the Pacific Northwest they're ubiquitous. They're just everywhere. And one of the most common questions we get is, are there more than one Bigfoot? And yeah, there's definitely more than one Bigfoot. And the other thing too is that there's a division of Bigfoot. So people just kind of think that Bigfoot is a primate or an ape or something kind of skulking around the woods that's very shy, that nobody can get a good photograph of. In actuality, all of that is true, but at the same time, the massive amount of people, and I say massive because I think there's probably hundreds of thousands of people. I know that sounds crazy. Hundreds of thousands of eyewitnesses of Bigfoot across North America. And Bigfoot has been sighted in 49 of the 50 states. There hasn't been an official sighting in Hawaii.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. And so many of those people that have these sightings have also seen strange lights. They've seen a variety of really, really odd things that are kind of inexplicable. So that has kind of divided the Bigfoot researchers into two camps. One is called Apers, and the other one is called the Woo. And the Apers are, more or less kind of on this research track of it being a biological whatever, anything from a primate to a humanoid to some sort of a cousin of mankind. And then the woo folks, being that they have seen these different forms of Bigfoot, believe that Bigfoot has, these paranormal abilities that science really hasn't discovered yet. And both camps are very steadfast in their beliefs. What we've seen starting to happen is that there's kind of starting to be a shift. More people are coming forward and going, I was embarrassed to admit, but actually, I did see some lights at the same time. Or I was camping and I woke up in the middle of the night and there was glowing things outside of my tent. And the stories just get more and more bizarre. So what we did is we made a documentary. We started out making the documentary A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. And about halfway through the process, we're like, we cannot fit all of this into 90 minutes, all this information. We need to make a second film called A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, because we wanted to give equal time to both camps, because we don't know who's right. We want to push the information out there and let you decide, let the viewer decide. Most importantly, we want to get people out into the wilderness in the right state of mind to maybe have an experience, to maybe see something.
Interesting. Okay, I was curious about that. So, two questions that I had alongside that: watching both Bigfoot Revealed and the Paranormal sort of variant of the films, I wondered: A, did you film all of the footage and document all that, and then break it apart in those two classifications, or did you realize after the first one that there were so many compelling stories that were in addition to what you revealed in Bigfoot Revealed that you wanted to then have a follow up? Was because they both came out the same year, right? And
The Paranormal Bigfoot just came out officially in December, so it was separated by about a year and a half.
okay, yeah, and both, by the way, if you guys are here and you want to check out these films, they're available on Amazon Prime. Go out there and get them. Definitely watch them in HD, and we'll talk about that in a minute because I want to talk about it, the actual production of that as well. We'll get into the geeky part of the
Yeah.
filming making, but um, and then secondly, um, the you said that you wanted to be able to offer equal time to both camps, and so um, how much of an overlap, like when you did so many of these interviews, okay, well, did you get to a point where there were some that you had to just screen right away and say, okay, these guys are full of shit, or we can't put this in the film because it's just not even legit? Did you get any of those by
No.
no?
And the reason why is because we did pre-interviews.
Okay.
So we never I'm trying to think if there was a single interview that we left on the cutting room. There was a couple of interviews that just didn't fit the story. And so we posted those on our YouTube channel. And
Oh,
and
okay.
and you users should all or viewers should also know that we have a full YouTube channel. And in the interest of transparency and research, we've taken, most of these interviews are anywhere from half an hour to an hour and a half to 2 hours. And it would be a shame for us to leave all of that information and numerous compelling stories on the cutting room floor. And so seeing as how we want to get this information out and change perception about Bigfoot, we have put all of this stuff out on YouTube. So folks can go and watch the interviews, and kind of, again, make up their own mind. And I think some of the interviews, we posted some recent interviews that kind of are borderline absurd to the point where they're just really hard to wrap your head around what some of these people are saying, to folks such as Todd Neese, who is a very rigid researcher and is very much in the Aper camp, if you will. They're very much
Yeah.
looking at this being a North American primate.
Sure.
But again, we don't want to censor anything, because we believe in the Bigfoot community there is some censorship. There are folks that are saying, no, 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 we're not going to look at the data of the paranormal because that doesn't fit what we're researching, and that
Right.
science doesn't work like that. You have to take it all into consideration. So that's what we're doing.
So the paranormal side of things, of course, it's that camp is looking at a lot of intangible things, right? The stuff that people can't touch or see or smell or have heard. And so if you haven't been able to touch those things, a lot of people aren't going to believe in it. And
Hmm.
I know you've got a ton of trolls, like I mentioned before the end of this show, looking at the different Facebook groups and the YouTube channels, and I see people that go through those pages and they look at your documentation without even looking at the film or even the details that you've actually assembled, with some proof. They're instantly saying, it's all garbage. Everything that I don't see doesn't exist, right? And it's understandable, right? That people that haven't actually touched something don't believe that it exists. But you mentioned that there are a million examples of things that are out there that are not associated with Bigfoot that people believe in that they haven't touched or seen, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, religion's the first one that comes to mind, obviously. Human beings can only see 1% of the light spectrum. 1%. That's it.
Okay.
99% of the light spectrum in this universe is invisible to the human eyes. If people would spend a little bit of time doing research on what other animals can see, like how a bee sees a flower, so on and so forth, they would start to see that the world of what is unseen is, I mean, never ending. It's infinite
Sure.
almost. And we believe that these things are have a basis in science. This isn't some sort of magic or and the term woo or the term paranormal we try and kind of poo poo because it's science that we can't measure yet. It's science that we don't really have a lot of explanation for. And throughout human history, that's been what's been happening. As we get older and wiser, we start figuring things out. The Earth is not flat, well, at least not to some people. The sun does not revolve around the Earth, so on and so forth. And we're just progressing as mankind, and I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but I think some of this stuff is very fundamental in that, if you start kind of putting two and two together and looking at things, you start realizing, well, wait a minute, there are forces that are so powerful out there that we can't see. Simple things like reversing magnets and feeling that force when they won't come together. These are some of the massive forces that involve electromagnetic energy that wrap themselves into quantum mechanics. And so, rather than put out a documentary and say, here's some weird paranormal stuff, we put out a documentary that says, here's some really weird paranormal stuff, but here's a scientist that gets into how some of this stuff might function,
Sure.
theories.
Yeah.
So we can kind of start wrapping our brains around what could really be happening. And the important part about all of this, Kevin, is that ultimately, I like to tell people that Bigfoot is the doorman to the skyscraper that is the paranormal, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So once he opens that door, and if you start equating some of this paranormal activity with Bigfoot, you start seeing things that could lead to proof of afterlife, proof of, interdimensional beings. I mean, these are some of the things that are actually being discussed in congressional hearings right now with UAP hearings. And science has already said, yeah, we think there's like 11 dimensions. We're pretty sure that there's multiverses. We might be
Sure.
living in a simulation. So science is on our side here. We're just saying that there could be some very strange creatures inhabiting some of these worlds.
You know, it's there's some great pieces in the films, especially at the introduction of the paranormal, where you've got a sort of multi-tribal Native American that actually comes into the scene and talks about some of that, both the sort of spiritual aspect of things, but also the metaphysical, the concept that we might at least explore in order to understand what we don't see or hear. And so I started off watching Bigfoot Revealed, with the only perspective that I sort of had was the interview that I did with Cliff Barackman a couple weeks ago or a month ago, where he talked about a lot of the earlier observations of Bigfoot, the Freeman photos, and some of the stuff that people know at least universally, even if you're not a Bigfoot aficionado, the stuff that you've seen online, and the stuff that's been commercially distributed. And in that conversation, he talks a little bit about science, talks about some of the discoveries and the objections that people had to believing in Bigfoot. Because one of the questions that I had was DNA evidence. There's so much now being done with in the last 25 years, right, with DNA in terms of, like solving crimes, finding, DNA evidence that actually proves that people may be falsely been accused. And so looking at DNA evidence with some of the discoveries that they've had with Bigfoot, Cliff talked about the nests. And you get into the nests in your Bigfoot Revealed where, people went out and they cast these nests and they did some of the discoveries. So tell me a little bit about what you discovered in terms of that, whether or not DNA became part of that, discovery, and then and maybe some of these objections that people have, to sort of disprove the validity and the legitimacy of that.
Yeah, it's funny. I like to tell people to prove that they're not real. Instead of proving that they're real, prove that they're not real. Because there is actually a lot of compelling evidence. We can start off with the old classic, the Patterson-Gimlin film, which was taken in 1967 near Bluff Creek in Northern California, not too far south of the Oregon border. I've been there myself. I've actually made the trek, and it is a trek to get there. And I've been there and I've walked the exact same site as Patty the Bigfoot did. And there's still a disagreement to this day among believers and skeptics whether or not that footage was real. And we can break that down and get into it. But I'm just going to say that I believe it's real for a variety of different reasons. Um, and that's our first and foremost compelling evidence. And it's crystal clear footage, obviously. But in modern times, like you said, with DNA, there has been DNA gathered. Multiple occasions there's been DNA gathered. The DNA has been tested and it comes back inconclusive because there's nothing in the data bank that's going to say, you got a match for Sasquatch.
Right.
And a lot of times it'll come back as, a female mother, but an unknown father. And I don't want to go down the conspiracy road, but obviously we're talking about Bigfoot here, so it's going to come up. I think, I shouldn't say I think, there's been some pretty decent studies on the DNA, and they've been submitted to scientific journals and stuff. They've been turned back, and I think that in the conspiracy side of things, I think that there is a lot of reasons as to why people don't want a lot of this information coming out. And again, we can get into that, and all of it makes sense.
And it's in the film too. You've got a lot of this in the film too, which is
Yeah, we talk all about it. But I think that this DNA stuff, I think it's pretty interesting. Again, I'm not a scientist, I'm a filmmaker, but it's pretty interesting and pretty compelling stuff to show that there is actually something out there that hasn't been cataloged yet. And then there's other evidence. I mean, the people laugh when they talk about the footprints, but in those footprints you see what are called mid-tarsal breaks, which fit the way that ape feet work. And you find these dermal ridges, which are similar to the fingerprints and the handprints that you have in your hand. A lot of these footprints are being looked at by serious scientists such as Cliff, Dr. Jeff Meldrum from Idaho State. And these guys are on top of their game. They know exactly what they're looking for, and they know how difficult it would be to hoax something like that. You would have to be an anthropologist out in the middle of nowhere, hoping that somebody stumbles across your footprints, right? So that's some of the evidence. There is a lot of photographic evidence, that's very compelling. And again, we can talk about that more at length as to why there's not more Patterson-Gimlin type films, why there's not clear, footage like what they got. And, a lot of people think that's a hoax because it is so clear, because it is, kind of, you guys were at the right place at the right time kind of thing. It's kind of suspicious.
well, a lot of the film, your films actually go into people saying the only reason that they got that film or that some people got, Bigfoot on any tape is because they wanted to be, that there was intelligence there behind the Bigfoot mind that said, we don't mind being captured in this particular area. And that one, it's tough for me to think about that and not be skeptical because you and I both know, like right now, the prevalence, every single person has a cell phone in their pocket, right? Um, and so I went into your films wanting to just have an open mind and just say, okay, don't put your preconceived ideas out there. And also, I like to study people. I
Yeah.
really love people, and we talked about this about energy, and so watching your interviews, and the reason I asked you when you were doing the interviews if there was anybody that you maybe cut out and put on the cutting room floor, there were some of the interviews that I saw that I thought, okay, personality wise, or at least their behavior seemed to me like it was well rehearsed and maybe not authentic. The two guys that actually saw the Bigfoot on the edge of the lake, that small lake, and you got
Hmm.
amazing killer drone footage from all these different angles, and they had seen Bigfoot from across the lake. Um, and I wanted to believe these guys, and I had a hard time with it.
Uh-huh.
I did. I just, even though I don't want to give too much of your film away. I really want people to see it because it's awesome, from a bunch of different angles. But that one in particular was the one I wanted to believe the most. Those
Hmm.
two guys, and um, so when you did interviews like that, uh, and coming from your perspective, when you went into it, did you were there some intuitive things that you had going on in these interviews that felt like, okay, um, let's get to the real root of this? I mean, you mentioned that all of the interviews that you did actually made the films, and I believe that some more damage can be done from people that were really hoaxing, right? And Cliff
Yeah.
talked about that too. People that
Yeah.
make fake casts and get out there and ruin the legitimacy of discovery. So, was there anything like that you felt like, okay, these guys, they're doing some damage to what I'm trying to document here?
I didn't think so. And again, it goes back to the pre-interview. And what's interesting, and I'll use Chad and Austin as an example. I actually found Chad's story on Facebook,
Okay.
and he made a post saying, I think it was in a Bigfoot group or something. It might have been a local Oregon Bigfoot group or something. And we were monitoring those, just looking for interesting stories. And Chad's, and his post kind of rambled on, and he was kind of like, "Hey, we saw this thing. We don't really know what to do with it. We're not sleeping at night. It's really freaking us out. We want to, connect with other people that have seen it." And one of the things that when we first started researching Bigfoot documentaries before getting into this was we felt like these documentaries were missing the psychological angle, the trauma. And there's many individuals, maybe over half, maybe 90% of the folks that have an encounter, especially one like what Chad and Austin saw, it leaves them with a kind of a PTSD. And I know
Yeah.
that sounds crazy, but it's
No.
true because your brain cannot rationalize what it is it's looking at. And the brain does that for a protective order, obviously. I mean, it goes back to our caveman days. Is that a saber-toothed tiger or a duck?
Yeah.
Like, do we run or do we hunt?
Right.
Um, and these guys are sitting there going, "That's a weird bear. That's so not a bear. What is that?" And then, the adrenaline starts flowing, and all these different chemicals start flowing in their brain. And it's like what Doug Meacham says, who's a hypnotherapist. The brain goes into hyperdrive and starts recording. It activates the recorder, and the sighting lasts for 90 seconds, and these guys are playing it over and over and over and over and over again ad nauseum. They can't sleep at night. Every time they shut their eyes, they're seeing it. And this relates to many of the people that are in our film. And so Chad and Austin were two great examples. And we posted their full length interview, the raw footage on YouTube. So you can see and hear and feel everything that they had to say. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do. I mean, we could have just done a full documentary on their sighting,
Yeah.
because of the interaction that they saw with the Bigfoot and the younger Bigfoot, and how it kind of
Pulled behind.
the adult kind of pushed it back and kind of
Yeah.
sheltered it from Chad and Austin. Um, but those guys, man, were freaked out. They were freaked out, and they needed help. They all they wanted to do was know that they were not alone. You know what I mean? And that's what a lot of these folks need. They need
Sure.
kind of like a support group and be like, "You saw that too, right? I'm not crazy," because that's ultimately what happens. And so I can see your point, Kevin, where you might look at them and be like, I'm not sure if these guys really saw that. And that might come from a place of nervousness on behalf of Chad and Austin because they were nervous.
Yeah.
But I will tell you something that's interesting is there's a bit of audio where they're standing at the lake and they're looking out at the lake, and Austin's talking to Chad, and he's like, "Man, I just want to see it again. I just want it to come back so we can get it on camera." Those guys didn't know I was recording that. That was them talking to themselves. You know what I mean? That
Yeah.
was them like in the moment reliving it, wanting to prove so bad that what they were saying was real. I'm getting
Yeah,
chills thinking about it. That's all they wanted. They wanted to be accepted. They wanted to be believed. They wanted people to not laugh at them. They were very brave to go on camera and tell their story.
for sure. And I didn't honestly feel at all like they were doing it to get attention, from the film or
Mm-hmm.
getting kind of exposure that way. It I will say, like, I mentioned the footage of that area blew my mind. Your drone footage is
Yeah,
awesome. You really
beautiful down there.
you capture well, not just that too, but the way that you got it from above and from different angles shows in a lot of the films, in both of the films, the perspective that you get shows the vast density of these forests in these areas where it's not a surprise that there are things that have not yet been observed or discovered. Right?
Yeah.
Because we've got millions and millions of acres out there that are not populated. Right? They're not densely populated, or they've not, thank God, not been bulldozed or turned into commercial space. I grew up in the woods in Montana. I grew up in a cabin, right, and spent a lot of time in the woods. And I thought about that perspective and that history, um, because I wanted to think about the things that weren't unexplainable to me.
Mm-hmm.
I observed a lot of things. One of the discoveries I had, this creek, there was a moose that had deceased, and it was decaying away into the creek, full of maggots, right? And they were taking the body down. You talk about this in the film that people question why they haven't found deceased Sasquatch. Why, and there's some great time lapse, and there's some documentation from the scientists there that say, look, that nature does a great job of erasing biological matter, and recycling that into the earth. Um, if there are that many Sasquatches out there, and if it's not a paranormal thing, if it actually is the sort of a bipedal ape like type creature, it seems like we should find somebody finding a Sasquatch into a creek. One of the things that, and I had asked Cliff about too, that is poop, like dung, like Sasquatch dung. Why we're especially in the nests, right, where they went into the cast and nest, where they'll find hair, but
Mm-hmm.
not fecal matter, that they could test. But there has to be some out there, right? I mean, there like some of these, because you know a lot more about the research and the discovery. So, what are they finding in Sasquatch poop that might point towards that being Bigfoot?
That's a great question. All I can tell you is they're finding big ones, really big ones, and they're not pellets. They're not bare. It's a different mixture of fiber. And by no means am I an expert on this, although some people might say I'm full of it. But they're you know they're definitely different shaped, and anybody and everybody can Google if they want to and look at pictures. And you kind of look at it and go, God, what animal did that? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it's out there. It's absolutely 100% out there. I haven't seen it. I don't know if I want to see it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's just more tangible proof that there's something going on.
When you and I were chatting offline too, you talked about how some people just they're surprised that there are male Bigfoot and female Bigfoot, Bigfoot, that there are like sort of uh, the family units that came
Yeah.
along with Bigfoot. So versus just this one creature that's like forever living, and it's all this mythological sort of thing. Um, when they've found these different like hairs and fecal specimen, have they found any juvenile Bigfoot that they feel like is really pointing towards proof and evidence?
Any juvenile, as in
Yeah,
uh,
like fecal matter, or even like the nests, maybe where, because if they talk about the family units, are
mhm.
they finding where in aside from observations like maybe Chad and Austin had, but in the nests or in the other places that they found physical evidence, where are they finding those units actually hair samples of both juvenile Sasquatch and parental?
That's a great question. I don't know. What I can say is yes, there is evidence of juvenile for sure. And I would suggest everybody in the audience check this out. Mel Skahan, who's on our YouTube page, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and he's actually our number one interview as far as views go. Excuse me. Mel Skahan tells a story about how, he was a forest conservationist for the Yakima tribe for a number of years, and he was out in the snow one time, and he started following these tracks, and he started seeing juvenile tracks, and he would actually, as he followed the tracks, he would see the behavior of the juvenile. He'd kind of be running around where the adults would stay in a straight line.
Hmm.
And then at one point, the juvenile tracks disappeared, and Mel, kind of reasoned that maybe dad or mom picked it up. But he could see it, like he could see an area where there was like a tree that was sticking out like this, and the footprints went up to the tree, and you could tell where the tree had been like kind of hitting the snow, like the kid was playing on the tree.
Oh, wow.
And these aren't human footprints because A,
Sure.
this is out in the middle of nowhere, and B, they're massive, big toed,
Sure.
prints. So I definitely suggest people check that out. But I don't honestly know if there's been, or how you would differentiate between hairs or some of the fecal matter versus it being human. I would imagine. I mean, the biggest differentiate between Sasquatch and human is just the size of the fecal matter, and I would assume that juvenile would be probably the same
Yeah.
size. I don't know. But the footprints story by Mel is pretty cool, showing how they're working together as a family.
Okay. And that was in the snow that Mel
Mm-hmm.
observed. So Caleb Rankin in the chat here says thoughts on Yeti versus Bigfoot. So Yeti is most commonly known. I could think in the snow, so what are the differences between those two, or are they the same?
I think they're probably cousins.
Okay.
Um, Everything I've heard is that they're virtually the same. One lives in the snow and is white, and the other one is, there's been white ones seen. There's been many white ones seen. There's been gray ones seen. There's been red ones and black ones and brown ones. They come in literally all different shapes and sizes. There's been reports, people have reported seeing them wearing clothes, like clothes that they've found, like a weird hat or something. And and it's common for people to talk about them going through their trash. So you don't know where they're getting some of this kind of stuff, but yeah, going back to the Yeti and the Himalayan, obviously that is, a very famous version of a Bigfoot, and yeah, from what I understand, they're about the same. What I don't know about Yeti is are the paranormal experiences that folks are having, and we at one point we were talking about maybe going over to the Himalayas and doing some research over there. There was a guide that wanted to kind of like take us up into the high country and introduce us to Sherpas and folks that have had multiple experiences with them. And I would love to know if there's a paranormal attribute to Yetis. I would assume there is. I just would, just based
Yeah.
on what the Bigfoot stuff.
Well, speaking of the paranormal, so if I think about, like, we mentioned, or I mentioned, the prevalence of cell phone cameras, right? Everybody's got a camera in their pocket. A
Mm-hmm.
lot more people are putting outdoor sort of surveillance cameras around their properties, right? And you've got, you mentioned hundreds of thousands of spottings, at least in North America or in the United States. You Are you finding any sorts of video being affected in the surveillance camera because the paranormal aspect, if they don't want to be seen, are they doing something to the film? Is there something that's being obscured in the film, that maybe weren't, because you mentioned, that the human eye doesn't spot certain things. So any surveillance camera stories you might have?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have there's lots of it. So in the first movie, we've got game camera that captured one near Coquille, Oregon, and I just want to just let everybody know that the footage that I'm getting is from the person that took the footage, or it was their game cam that took the footage. It's not something I'm pulling off of YouTube. I'm
Uh,
getting the actual original file, so I can look at it, so I can try and debunk it. Is that a guy in a ghillie suit? Is that just a really hairy dude?
Yeah.
I don't want to put this stuff out there if I don't feel like it's real, or we don't feel. I mean, it's a collective decision between Mike and Jill and I, and we all talk about it. But this particular webcam caught something that was very compelling, and initially it does kind of look like it could be a guy in a ghillie suit, but you see on his you see his right hand is way down to about the middle of his thigh near his knee. You can kind of see the fingertips poking up. And one of the attributes of Bigfoot is that they have extremely long arms. Their arms, and everybody says this that sees one, their arms and hands can sometimes reach past their knees. And this particular one kind of fits that bill. So it like cuts right across the camera. And what was really cool about that one is I got a bunch of photos from the guy. He just basically offloaded his SD card. And in those photos, I found, the camera had not moved, but it was like 2 nights before there was a deer that was eating right in front of the camera. And so I took the two photos and I lined them up to try and measure the height of the Sasquatch, and just based on the rough average of what a deer's height is.
Sure.
And I came up to about 3.5 feet, for the deer, and that allowed me to roughly measure the Sasquatch at 6.5 feet. And that's the other thing that people need to understand is that there's not. I mean, how many people know 6.5 foot person?
Right.
That's willing to throw on a costume in the
Right.
middle of the night. That it's time stamped. So when the photo's taken. It's in the middle of the night. You have to find a costume that fits them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like there's not a lot of people that are willing to. It's like, bro, I'll give you a 6-pack to fool so and so. It doesn't really happen all that often. So it's a compelling case. The next compelling case, I'll try and keep this quick,
None.
is there was video footage that was taken up near Mount Rainier by a woman named Barb Shoup, who's a Bigfoot investigator. And what she does is she has a walking stick and she takes an iPhone Touch, and she kind of mounts it on her walking stick, and then she hits record on the video. And so as she's walking around, it's pointing in different areas where she's not looking. And so the theory is that if you're being observed in the forest, they're looking in your eyes, as any animal would be, to see where you're looking, if you're looking at them, whatnot. So she feels like she can sometimes potentially catch things that she's not observing.
Sure.
And that's exactly what happened. And what she caught on camera, I'm convinced, is some of the most compelling footage I've ever seen in my life. And I've tried to debunk it. I showed it to the Skinwalker Ranch scientists. Eric Bard, he's the chief scientist at Skinwalker Ranch. He saw the footage. He was blown away. He had no explanation for it. And it's a cloaked figure. It's cloaked like the movie Predator, if you've seen Predator.
Yeah.
It's cloaked, and you can clearly see something ducking down, turning, and running away. And you can see it bouncing as it steps away. And what's really interesting is that Barb had turned her head at just the exact time that this was recording, and she saw a black figure run away. So with her eyes, she saw something black, but the camera caught something cloaked.
Wow.
So you can take that information and use it how you must. But the question is now, is all of these security cameras out there, are they not picking up things because they're cloaked?
Right.
You know what I mean? There's also a ton of evidence that they are aware of the electromagnetic signals that these electronic cameras are, it's low energy, but they're putting out some signals. They can see the infrared light in order to get night shots. And many, many people will come back and find their game cameras destroyed.
Really?
Yeah.
So I was curious about that. I mean, because I've walked through enough backcountry areas where I didn't realize that there were cameras there, but if they're being destroyed, obviously, it's less likely that hunters are out there, or poachers, trying to kill game camera from capturing their presence. But there's somebody in the chat that's been mentioning some of their experiences. Mr. Duffy 81 says, I had one let me hear its footsteps from only like 15 or 20 feet away. And when I ran over to see it, I couldn't see the creature. It made no sense to me. So those experiences, he says it's on video on his channel. When in your first, in Bigfoot Revealed, you had this professional from Oregon Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and worked for Forest Service in Montana, worked for the Conservation Corps in Yellowstone, and really feel strongly that somebody with that experience is they're speaking with authenticity, and they're not speaking like to try and get attention from somebody in a sort of tabloid sense. I thought it was great that he went on camera in uniform, and spoke with sort of experience in that area. As you were interviewing these people, was there any kind of blowback from some of these organizations? Did Oregon Fish, Wildlife, and Park say, hey man, you know what? We don't necessarily want you on camera with your uniform telling these stories because it makes us more accountable for some things we can't explain. Did you have anything like that going on?
No, he had to get permission from his higher
Okay.
ups. Yeah, and they approved it. He was able to tell us as much as he knew, or so he said.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well,
um, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that with Stuart Love. Sweet guy, and we were very appreciative of him going on camera. But
sure.
he might know more than he's letting on, and there's reasons for that. And I
Sure.
appreciate that. We appreciate the reasons for it.
What kinds of things might someone be concerned about by sharing that information?
Well, there is, believe it or not, there's a big economic issue behind all of a sudden discovering a giant humanoid in the woods, and that those are some of the questions that we talked to Stuart about. He went into what would happen if something was discovered, and I think that there would be almost instant changes to our law, maybe temporary changes to our law, where we saw some of this stuff play out in the 80s and 90s with the spotted owl.
Right.
It shut down logging. It caused an economic disaster. There's actually even kind of a joke, and I don't even know if it's based on true in the Bigfoot community, that the spotted owl fiasco was dress rehearsal for disclosure of Bigfoot.
Mm.
And there could be some truth to that. Whether there is or not, I certainly think that industries and government learned a lot about what happens when you protect an entire forest for a species. And I totally agree with I'm an eco warrior. I believe in preserving nature, and I think that it was important to save the spotted owl. I also think that it's important to kind of keep these things hidden because I think as we can all deduct, there's somebody out there that's going to want to be the first person to bag one, to be the famous guy that shot Bigfoot.
Right.
There are you would have a storm of media and international media descending on that small town or whatever, talking about Bigfoot. And then it kind of trickles down to, maybe there's some recreationalists that don't want to go camping anymore, that don't want to go hiking anymore, that start feeling fearful that, yeah, no, now that we have a body, now that there's proof, are these things dangerous? Are they not dangerous? Does the government shut down large portions of national forests because they're being studied? Um, Arguably, the disclosure of Bigfoot, if it was outed in the media and whatnot, or it became quote unquote known to science, would be one of the biggest stories in human history, next to probably ETs.
Right.
Um, and I think to a certain extent, even bigger than ETs because they're literally living. They're almost like our neighbors to a
Right.
certain extent. So there's these ramifications that when you start thinking about them could really change our society, could really change us, even down to the community level, and it could economically disrupt so many of these small towns that depend on this money in the summertime for folks recreating. So
Sure.
we don't know, and I would certainly bet my house that the government has done studies on it because it would be irresponsible for them to not do studies on it because there are enough reports for them to warrant some, black ops kind of a study to go out there and say, okay, here's what we do if these things are actually outed or if someone kills one.
Well, you mentioned that there are neighbors. So right now, because urban areas are spreading so much, you've got urban sprawl that's coming from every major city, going out into these rural areas where a lot of animals, then their habitat is being imposed upon, and so you'll see bear and elk, deer, moose, fox, coyotes, everything in more populated areas because their space is being imposed upon. To me, it makes sense then, for a Bigfoot that would normally live in sort of a secluded area, that we might see them more in urban areas. Have they had some discoveries and because you've seen all the tracking, I saw the tracking maps. If 100, hundreds of thousands of observations have been met. Have you seen any in Central Park or any sort of urban areas that way?
Well, yeah, I mean, we can use Portland as an example. Portland has the largest forested park in the United States,
Sure.
which is Forest Park. or maybe it might even be Urban Park. I think it's Forest Park, and there's been a sighting reported in Forest Park, which is just literally a few minutes from downtown Portland. Um, we have somebody that's in our film. He doesn't talk about this in our film, but he's a Bigfoot researcher named Joe Bielart, and he told us a story about how he's been told that if you're familiar with the Portland area, you've got the Coast Range and you've got the Cascades, and that he's been told that they migrate during the wintertime from the Cascades to the Coast Range. In order to do that, they follow the Tualatin River. They eventually, it's kind of like they follow the Clackamas River to maybe the Willamette to I don't know the river
Sure.
systems well, to the Tualatin. And he actually met some guys that had photos of them in a green space in Beaverton. And he didn't get copies of the photos. Of course, he didn't get copies of the photos, but he said they were the best photos he'd ever seen.
Yeah.
This is like in the 80s. And there's reports. We live out in Hillsboro, and not more than 6 miles there was a sighting.
Wow.
Just on the edge of wine country. So they're out there. I mean, there's a researcher down in Bend named Randy Sylvie who just took a report last week of a woman came out of her house in Lapine, Oregon, and she heard her dogs barking. She wanted to know what the commotion was. She got out of her house and she looked over, and there's a Bigfoot going through her trash, and it literally scared the bejesus out of her. It scared her so much she didn't tell her husband, which I know sounds opposite of what would happen, but she thought that he would think she was insane. And so the very next morning, he goes out and gets into his car to go to work, and he finds all these footprints, these massive footprints. You know, so yeah, they're definitely not afraid to kind of get into the urban area for sure.
When a situation like that happens, he's in the pine, right? And he finds the
Mhm.
footprints. He goes back and tells his wife, "Hey, this is crazy. There are footprints out here." And she said, "Yeah, I know. I saw it running through the garbage last night." Do a massive army of Bigfoot researchers then descend upon, or how did that how did they get the word out? And then what happens with all the researchers? Do people just congregate and get there to try and document this and find details that they can then present more evidence?
It's kind of like researchers kind of have their area, and there might be groups of researchers. Like I know Cliff Brockman has the Mount Hood area, and Todd Neese, who's actually used to live there in Welch's. He's just recently moved out of town for a while. Both Cliff and Todd would go and they would do the investigations. I don't know that they did a lot of investigations together per se. They would go out like Bigfooting, maybe. And again, it's like this is not like totally my expertise. I mean, I know that there was a sighting by some mountain bikers up near just off of Highway 26 near the Salmon River. Yeah, Salmon River, I think it was. And some mountain bikers had a sighting, and I think Cliff found really, really good tracks. Um, so they go out there, but yeah, it's not like it's a flood of people descending on
Sure.
it. That can happen. There was a trackway down near Cottage Grove, Oregon, a number of years ago where there was 100 footprints, and it's still debatable whether it was real or it was a hoax. There's some really good signs to lead to both. But yeah, a lot of researchers came down for that because it was the largest trackway that's been discovered in a long time.
I hear some of the people that object, to the validity of Bigfoot research. I hear a lot of people say, "Well, why is there only one foot, oftentimes, or one print discovered? That you
Hmm.
rarely see them in
Hmm.
pairs, but to have 100 is that's a large amount of work to be done if you're trying to hoax somebody, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
and you've got to. I mean, these things have to have large stride, right? I mean, sometimes their stride is 6 feet, and they
wow.
walk differently than humans. It's almost like it's back to back. So yeah, it would be pretty difficult to fake that stride, um, and to manufacture something. You'd almost have to manufacture something with silicone and whatnot. You'd have to be really good and really know what you're doing and really plan it out in order to hook something like that.
Like I said, I don't want to give too much away in your films. And so, guys, if you got here late and didn't know, Brett is a documentary filmmaker. You can see Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, both the first episode or the first installment, and then the second film, the Paranormal sort of phase of that filmmaking. On the paranormal side, was there anything that you ran across in documenting this that just seemed so far out of the realm of possibility that it just seemed like inconceivable to you?
Yep. Yep. And I've heard even stranger things that, we haven't been able to put into a documentary yet, but um, I'm not going to give too much away. But at the very end of A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, there's two men. They were on their way to work. They live down in Coquille, Oregon. It's the owner of a construction company and his foreman, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning, I think on November 3rd, 2021, or November 1st. It was one of those days, early days of November. The sun is out, it's shining through the trees. They're driving down the road. They're about, I don't know, half a mile from Harold's house where his foreman Cody met him that morning. And they come around a corner and they see something giant standing on the side of the road. And Harold initially thinks it's an elk. It's so big. It's on its hind legs, like trying to get at something. But there was nothing there. There was no bushes there for it to get. And then Harold quickly realized he was looking at what he called an ape man. Both of these guys were skeptics. They would never have believed in any of this. And then they saw it do something that is completely absurd. And again, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It was so bizarre that Harold hired someone to paint the metamorphosis, shall we call it? And I'm going to leave it at that so people
Okay.
watch the film.
Yeah.
But it is it's up there as probably the top three most extraordinary story I've ever heard. And and Harold talked to me, and again, we pre-interview these folks and get to know them before we put them on camera. We want them to be comfortable with us, and they
Sure.
want to be comfortable with us. And Harold told me, he says, I'm doing one interview and it's with you because I feel like it's really important to get this out to people. People need to know that there's this kind of stuff going on. But I don't really want to talk about it anymore on camera. I don't want to be bugged about it. Um, but and I followed up with Harold, a few times since the movie's come out, and he's like, I still think about it every single day, Brett. I still think about it every day. There's not a day I go around that corner where I don't think about what I saw that day. And he
Wow.
says in the documentary, he says, "Why us? Why was it doing it there? Why wasn't this creature doing whatever it needed to do in the middle of the forest for no one to see?" He feels like they were meant to see it. Um, and it's again, it's on that same kind of wavelength as some of these folks that deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, because you cannot stop reviewing it. You
Yeah.
cannot stop asking questions. And in an event like this, and I speak for like every individual that's in both films that we interview, an event like this flips your worldview upside down. You're never ever the same person.
Sure.
The best example of that, in my opinion, is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You know, he's got a family. He's an electrical repairman. He's a lineman, and he's out. He sees UFOs right near. He sees UFOs, and he becomes obsessed, and he has to see them again. So much so that he gives up his family. I mean,
Right.
what father and husband would do that, right?
Right.
But that's all too common in this realm. You can become obsessed with it.
Well, you talked about the post traumatic stress disorder, and I talked about my skepticism with Chad and Austin. I realized that, there are people out there that will claim trauma, from something that when people are in disbelief, that is very difficult, too, because, if a woman goes through a traumatic experience and she's not believed, it's horrible, for
Yeah,
all the aftermath that comes with that. So,
yeah,
when I think about my perspective and watching them, I realize I don't feel like it's bad to be skeptical. It's good to question,
yeah,
some things. And for
yeah,
me, like I said, I study human behavior a lot. And so somebody in the chat mentioned that they really do feel like that was a believable interview and believable characters. And um, I was thinking about, any other scenario, if somebody said, he said, she said kind of thing. The fact that there are two of them together is probably better for both of them, that they can share that experience, right? Because if it was one person and they just feel completely isolated and they don't have anyone other than a community that, is is trying to be empathetic to their situation, but wasn't there to experience it. So maybe it's just a beautiful thing that those guys have their experience together.
Yeah.
And for you to help sort of carry that forward, they felt like they could trust you, and other people that were interviewed felt like they could trust you. There's such a wide array of people that had the experiences that you've talked to, from all walks of life. And I loved that because it really
Yeah.
did sort of paint a picture of just this macrocosm of people in the, in America or the world, that have had these experiences. So it's not just like one, you're not just getting conspiracy theorists, people that are out there, and so, um, as you finished those films, and I'd asked at the beginning, did you document this stuff for Bigfoot Revealed and then Paranormal Bigfoot? You documented, you got all that footage together, right? When you were working on this thing, you assembled the footage and then segmented into two different films. When you finished the films, because so many observations have been done afterward, have you found anything in follow-ups that you think, "Oh, man, I wish we could have had that for the film?" Is that gonna be, second edition, releases of these pieces? Or has there been a lot of footage that you found afterward that would be, um, again, compelling to add a third film together?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, we're currently working on a movie right now, a doc about the voices in the wilderness, the Sierra sounds, as they're called, that were voices that were recorded near in a very, very isolated area near Yosemite National Park. And we're telling, and Ron Moorhead is famous for discovering, or I'm sorry, for recording those sounds. Those sounds had been going on in the camp area for a number of years before Ron came up there, and Ron recorded them, and he's the guy that's associated with them. But there's a whole story behind that we're about to tell. But going back to your question, you know, this is part of the reason why we've put out our YouTube channel is because there hasn't really been too much that I've found through the editing process that I wish I had more of. But what I do wished is I could have included more of their story, and in order to condense this down into an easily digestible 90 minutes, you've got to cut out some important details. It sucks, but you do.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's why we've put those interviews out there. And we've edited out the questions. We've edited out, um, miss up, anything that wasn't relevant to the conversation we've cut out, which equals, most of these interviews, maybe a couple of minutes, nothing big, because we want to be transparent. We want people to watch all of this stuff in context.
Sure.
There is one thing I want to bring up though. Um, when we were filming a psychic named Tara, and we were filming at this area called the Owl Moon Lab. The Owl Moon Lab had a bunch of activity, and you guys will see that in it. We tease it in the first film, but we really get into it in the second film. And Mike Ferry and I were setting up, cameras and lights and stuff. It was just us before the interview subject had arrived, and man, we were hearing weird stuff in the woods, weird knocks, and we're out in on BLM land in a national forest, and a long ways from anybody. And it's like, I don't know, it's like 5 o'clock at night. It's like kind of hazy and foggy. It was just a really strange vibe in the air. And we're filming the interview with two cameras. And like every once in a while I'd see this little white pop on the camera. And Mike and I have been shooting collectively together, we've probably been shooting 50 years,
Yeah.
of experience, maybe 60. And we're like, what's this? What are we looking at? Is the camera going bad? What's going on? And we couldn't quite figure it out. So you know, I was still rolling, and I said to Jill, the co-producer, I said, write this time code down. I want to go back and review the footage. And so I went back and I reviewed the footage, and I was seeing these little, like I said, these little white pops, and it was just every so often.
Not
And
in
I
a
went and
pattern.
what's that?
Was it in a timed pattern or was it sporadic?
It was sporadic. It was
Okay.
totally sporadic. And I went back and I analyzed them, and I found still frames, and I pulled the still frames, and these weren't, sometimes with cameras you can have dead pixels, and a dead pixel would look like that. It would kind of flash or whatever. Most of the time, a dead pixel is constant, so it's like a little white dead pixel in your camera sensor. These were different, and I show them in the documentary. As it turns out, we interviewed Dr. Simeon Hein, who has all kinds of different theories involving quantum physics. and whatnot. And he starts talking about some of these strange phenomena happening, this ball lightning, electromagnetic energy, and whatnot. And so I said, well, I'm gonna kind of lean towards it being an anomaly with the camera, even though I kind of sort of knew better, because we also at that very same time we recorded this weird growl. It was super bizarre. But anyways, I'm trying to be skeptical. We still try and be skeptical. I said I'm gonna just say it was something weird with the sensor. Maybe there was a high volume of electromagnetic energy. I don't know. But I said if we see it on the other camera, then we know it's real. And sure enough, I found it on the second angle.
Really?
So it was really happening.
Wow.
It was really happening. Number one. Number two is I've never ever in my entire career ever seen a phenomenon like this. And there's a point where there's like a little squiggle. It's almost like a comma shape or something. And what I've deducted is that whatever it was moving so fast that it left a light trail at 1/124th of a second,
Wow.
which led me to believe that what we were recording was a real phenomenon of something happening paranormal.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned your YouTube channel, and having so many follow-ups. I think knowing that you got the full interviews, so each of the segments that made it into your two films, you've got the full breadth and depth of interviews that are out there on the YouTube channel. They can just find those right at youtube.com or YouTube, and then
Yeah.
check A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. Those are all there. I know it's a massive channel. You got a ton of content there.
Ton of content. We don't have the interviews for the second film out yet because we
Okay.
don't want to spoil anything. For We want to get the second film out there a little bit more, but
Okay.
eventually we will be posting those full-length interviews. But right now we have over 70 videos. We have podcasts. We go back and we re-interviewed some of these folks in podcasts, and then we posted the entire interviews.
Wow. There's some real activity. Mr. Duffy 81 talks about that he had similar orbs, kind of like your pops. Um, with the amount of footage that you've filmed, it's kind of surprising that you hadn't seen more unexplainable things. Because you've been shooting everywhere.
Yeah.
Did you notice more? Because I've seen some incredible footage that you've got with your drone work. Do you see more now with that type of footage? Because you're out, if you think about the footage that you were shooting up until whatever the last 10 years, it's all right. I mean, it's all somewhat surface, right? You've
Yeah.
all, within 8 to 10 feet from the earth plane. But now as you've gotten up farther and gotten more of a panoramic perspective, are you seeing more unexplainable things with that kind of footage?
You know, I got to be honest with you. I haven't really seen it,
Okay.
and I do look for it. I do look for it. Um, Jill and I had a UFO experience down in Utah that was interesting, um, and I flew my drone. So I'm going to keep this short, but we basically saw a UFO and we saw something that looked like it landed on a mountain top, and we were a couple of miles from the mountain. So I got my drone up into the air and I was like, I'm going to fly over. I've got 45 minutes of battery. I'm going to try and see what it was that landed on top of this mountain. And so it's a brand new drone. I think it had like 3 flights to it. And this drone is pretty sophisticated. So it has 360-degree optical sensing. It's a DJI, it's a $3,000 drone. And I'm beelining towards the mountain at 45 miles an hour. And I'm in clear air. I'm not near anything. There's no birds chasing me. There's no nothing. I'm trying to get to the top of the mountain as quickly as I can. And I start getting warnings that I'm about to crash into something. And it would show up here, and it would show up there, and it would show up here. I mean, we're talking like, beep, 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 beep,
Yeah.
beep, 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 beep. It's kind of like the sensors in cars now.
Sure.
Same idea. Zero explanation for it. It didn't do it before. It didn't do it since. Clear air. So whatever it was that had crashed in the mountain did not want to be photographed. And I was like, I don't want whatever this thing is to just, knock my new drone out of the sky. So I
Right.
turned around and came back. But I've been flying drones for over 10 years and I've never, ever had an experience like that before.
Incredible. In the chat, somebody mentions that they really do feel like there's a big connection between Bigfoot and UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
Because the paranormal, there's so much unexplainable, sort of phenomenon. Do you feel like they, maybe Bigfoot came from, say, another place not of this earth?
You know what, Kevin? I'm completely open to it.
Yeah.
I mean, after hearing and seeing all that we've seen, I'm completely open to it. There is a huge correlation between UFOs and Bigfoot. Um, a lot. What's really interesting is a lot of the people that have been involved in the UAP community and the UFO community are saying some of the same things and talking about some of the same science that we've been hearing about from folks who are having paranormal experiences. One such example is the way that Bigfoot run or move. A lot of people say it looks like they're on ice skates
Mm.
or that they're gliding. It's not like they're, Patty in the Patterson Gimlin film looks like she's walking, and she's walking quickly. She's definitely walking differently than a normal human being. But these people are saying they're moving at like unworldly speeds. And there's this theory that they're able to generate a little bit of like kind of an anti-gravity, um, which I know sounds crazy, but we hear some of these same things with folks that have seen UFOs and talk about how there's anti-gravity properties. And again, it all gets down to this quantum physics that we don't quite understand yet.
Sure.
But there are a lot of reports of UFOs and Bigfoot in the same time, same place. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of correlations.
In the chat, one of the folks has mentioned here, Dogcatcher asks about the upcoming Sundance screened American comedy Sasquatch Sunset feature film with Jesse Eisenberg and Riley Keough.
Yeah.
Uh, if you've got comedic sort of aspects, do you feel like it takes away from some of the legitimacy of the discovery?
Mm-hmm. It most definitely does. We fight against that all the time. Because we can kind of take aliens seriously thanks to movies like Predator and Alien and,
Yeah.
like things that scare you.
Yeah.
Bigfoot has kind of got this like reputation as being like something that you find in a mug at the airport.
Right. Sticker
or
on
a
your
bumper sticker. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or a
yeah.
sticker on a microphone
Right.
or a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and I completely get that. And I love the fact that Bigfoot is a mascot for folks. I think it's awesome. I think it's about independence. It's about strength. I love that. But yeah, there's kind of this idea, especially like when we see a trailer for this movie, Sunset Sasquatch Sunset, I guess it is. I watched the trailer. I haven't seen the movie, and I'm open. I'm open to it, and I've read some interviews where they talk about how they actually consulted researchers. They didn't name names. I don't know who they are, and I haven't talked to anybody that said that they've helped out the filmmakers. But they said they tried to make it quote unquote accurate. I don't know. I mean, from what I saw in the trailer, some of it looked accurate, some of it didn't. I like the idea that it kind of keeps getting Bigfoot and Sasquatch out, into the public.
Sure.
People can talk about it. But yeah, I mean, it can hurt us. It can hurt us. We're out to say that, yeah, this really actually is a serious thing. I mean, the name Bigfoot doesn't do it any favors. We really need to kind of start referring to it as Sasquatch.
I was going to ask. Yeah. So the terminology, you'd rather use the term Sasquatch just to maintain some credibility to the concept, the idea.
It's more respectable, and it's truthful. And, the native tribes around North America, I mean, I don't know. I'm not aware of a native tribe around North America that doesn't have Sasquatch in their mythology or in their culture. And any one of these tribes will tell you that it's not mythical. It's something that they have interacted with. It's another tribe of Indians, what some cultures will say. And all of these different tribes have different names for them. There's a Midwestern tribe that we visited, and they call their Bigfoot or their Sasquatches Sitongas. So everywhere you go, or Sabe is another one. So everywhere you go, there's a different name for them.
That historical sort of look at Sasquatch over the years, when you see pictographs and you see cave paintings and you see, something that predates, modern technology, those are the things that are, to me, the most fascinating, because when they find pictographs showing what looks to be an unidentified flying object, or they have an ape-like creature that's twice the size of a human, or somewhat close to that's menacing in terms of size, and something that we just wouldn't see on a daily basis. To me, that is more interesting, and the idea the idea that could that is real is, to me, more interesting than CGI and using new technology, because the you know well, in two respects. You could look at things like modern religion, or like ancient religion, and you see how maybe stories get passed down, and the stories get larger and more preposterous, I think, over time. But those things, when they'll have cave paintings from completely different parts of the planet, and they show essentially the same thing. If you look at cave paintings and pictographs and Eastern Asia versus in southwestern United States, that were taken in long distances and many many years apart. But there's no way. It's not like they were texting each other saying, "Hey, here's a
Yeah.
here's this flying." When they had pictures of helicopters, like, or rotating, crafts that are, these cave paintings that are thousands of years old. To me is more compelling than what you might find using drone footage, or you know game footage. But did you do a lot of those kinds of historical, looks? And did you look, because you mentioned talking to different tribes, and did you find some resistance to those tribes wanting to talk to an American filmographer?
We, yes, I mean, sort of in that, we didn't do as much as we could have. We could do a whole documentary series on Sasquatch and their relation with the native tribes around North America. We interviewed in our first film. We interviewed Henry Franzoni, who is a scientist, and he's had incredible Bigfoot encounters. And Henry's been working with the tribes in the Columbia River area to try and help restore salmon for 30 years. And, a lot of these tribes would invite him into some of their spiritual gatherings, and they would share things with him they wouldn't share with an ordinary person. And a lot of times, not even with ordinary, or I'm sorry, not ordinary, with other tribes. So, they would talk to him about how, they've all witnessed them swimming across the Columbia River, or they would have crystal clear video that they wouldn't disseminate. They just didn't want it getting out. It's their property. It belongs to them. These are sacred. These are not to be exploited. Um, so, some tribes and some Native Americans are happy to go on camera. Mel Skahan has been wonderful in going on camera and talking about his experiences in the Yakima Reservation. But some are closed, and we completely respect that. And in all cases, there needs to be some consultation with elders, and the elders make the decision as to whether or not they're allowed to talk to us. We're ready to talk to anybody, that has had native experiences about, what they've experienced. We're hoping to do more of that, and we're starting to make some inroads with some more tribes to be able to go out with them and get their stories on camera.
It does feel like you're not exploiting. At the beginning of Bigfoot Paranormal, like I said, you've got a really a magnificent intro. It's fantastic. The way that comes in and sort of introduces you to uh, multi-tribal sort of perspective on it, and it doesn't feel campy. And I think some of the comments in the chat are about some of the campiness that American films have sort of made Bigfoot. You
Yeah,
touched on it, and like Harry and the Hendersons, was such
yeah,
a, it's like Disney, for Sasquatch. And I think um, the more that the government sort of acknowledges, because you mentioned, that there has to have been some research, from the government on the legitimacy of a lot of these claims and observations. And when the government talks about leaking, or at least opening the vault, for all the documented UFO observations that they've made, um, and maybe the resistance to that, you talked about the economic impact, the
hmm
spotted owl phenomenon. if that affected, if the discovery and the acknowledgement that Bigfoot needed to be protected in these areas, it would have an economic impact. But there are schools of thought that say, that our government, do you want the American, or the world, not the American, do you want governments to finally open up this information so that there's discovery and yet maybe some respect, for the development of our understanding of Sasquatch, maybe with the hope that we don't exploit them and take advantage of, their habitats.
That's a loaded question. There's a part of me that yes, absolutely, and there's another part of me that's no, absolutely not. I'm really divided. I personally, I don't know that we're ready for it as a society, and we touch on that a little bit in the documentary. Stan Avery talks about how all these rednecks going out to shoot one. We show this guy that's kind of like,
Yeah,
and I
that
don't
is a real
know. I don't.
fear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of argument to say that our society in the last decade or so has taken a couple of steps backwards. We've been, especially, it's more kind of an American society of just being like greedy and wanting fame, and I think that's a lot of that has to do with social media and whatnot.
Yeah,
And I see instances where people would absolutely exploit them. And I don't want that for them. I don't think anybody wants that for them. These things are a type of people as far as we're concerned. They have intelligence. We're trying to demonstrate in some of our stories that not only do they have intelligence, but they have a wild array of personalities. From Chad and Austin's story, they care about their young and take
right.
care of them, and they're teaching them. Um, they have a sense of humor. Even we get into that with the paranormal Bigfoot. There's a
Yeah,
gifting exchange that takes place. Um, and there are many people, believe it or not, across this country that have interactions with these things on sometimes a daily basis. They live on these huge acreage of land, and they have gifting that takes place with them. We interviewed a woman named Arla Williams who had her first experience when she was 5 years old in Oklahoma, of all places, and she's now in her 60s, and that continues to this day. you know. And people are like, well, where's her photographs? Well, she's actually got some of them being shy, and you can kind of see them peeking over some leaves. Um, so we have to be very careful with this disclosure. Um, and I'm hoping that at some point our society will be ready for it, but I just at this point I'm not convinced that we really are, that we're
sure.
responsible for it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned this before, that in looking at your channel and looking at Facebook pages and other groups, that there's so much divisiveness, just like everything else in our society. But to hear, you know, different camps and different people talking about how right they are versus how wrong, somebody else is, the way that, discovery would be treated is certainly something to be concerned about.
Yeah.
Um, some people that are here in the chat, they're asking, like, could be Bigfoot be an ET creation? Yeah, so this sort of touches on this, and Brett and I were just talking about this, um, that so much of this sort of phenomenon is based on things that people that don't believe in what they can't touch, see, smell, hear, or what they haven't had physical and personal experience with. And so what I would hope is that I can gain more understanding about those things that I don't understand, right? I mean, I just want to be accepting of those things.
Yeah.
And my skepticism is only there, because I am in certain circles in the past, um, skepticism probably would have saved me from some heartache, or
Yeah.
cynicism,
Of course.
and so those, we want to feel safe, we want to feel secure in our own beliefs and that kind of thing. Um, you mentioned something just before we went live that just talked about the collective conscious, and how as human beings it's just really important for us to be accepting of each other. And
Yeah.
I love your perspective on that, because I really do feel like that more than anything else would sort of unify us at this point.
Yeah, there's no question about it. There's a famous speech that Ronald Reagan gave in the 1980s to the UN that talks about how an alien invasion would bring all of us together in the world. And so there's a lot of people that think that that was kind of sort of a soft disclosure. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think he was trying to make a really relevant point, and he did. And we need to understand that we all come from the same place. We all literally come from the stars. There's 92 atoms. I think there's 92 atoms in the universe that make up everything, and each one of us is made up of that. And you really start getting into the energy, and it's this. I don't think this is a woo woo thing. I think that you can really start seeing that we are really connected, and I think that any one of us on this planet can share a story about how that time they got a feeling about a loved one or a family member that ended up being true. And quantum mechanics has shows that quantum entanglement can, you can manipulate a molecule, here on Earth, that and the other molecule is halfway across the universe and it will react. They're entangled. Why is that? They can't quite figure that out. Um, and I think that humans can kind of do the same thing. I think that's part of love. That's part of that connection. And I think really what we're trying to do and what we're trying to say is that, again, Bigfoot can kind of open the door for some understanding behind this stuff. Number one, number two, Bigfoot is 100% connected with nature, and we've lost that, man. You and I are old enough that we can remember, and I know most of the audiences too, that we can remember spending days and days and days outside as
Yeah.
kids, really connecting with the outdoors and connecting with the world and exploring the world. And man, kids these days, they're just on their phone, they're on TikTok.
Right.
They're learning about the craziness of humanity and not the wonderment of nature. And so that's a huge part about this, what we're trying to do and what we're talking about. In Canada now, doctors are prescribing a certain number of time out in nature to treat depression,
Right.
anxiety, PTSD. It's important. So this hopefully gets us back. And I think that once people get out into nature, you start plugging into that consciousness of the forest, of the birds, of the animals. They pick up on that.
Yeah.
It sounds crazy, but they do. It's like the saying that a dog can smell fear.
Yeah.
Well, I think they can smell the happiness too. They know when you're cool. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Absolutely.
we absolutely believe that Bigfoot can do the same thing.
Yeah, man, I love that optimism. I really do think that the idea and the promotion to be able to get outside and be connected with nature, it's when I'm not grounded that way, my life is upside down, and so I started trying to hack the algorithm of Facebook to use Zuckerberg's, like memories. So
Mm-hmm.
once you're like this point last year, this is where you were,
Yeah.
and I try to get out to get 60 seconds of serenity, in nature. If I can't do it every day, I can hack and look back. Okay, a year ago, this is where I was at. Me and my dog in
Yeah.
nature is the one place where I could feel like I had everything together. I really do like the idea that promotion, through your through your filmmaking and through these stories, I think is a beautiful way to reconnect. Um, there are a lot of people engaged right now, in the chat in the discussion about our conversation and maybe their own perspective on this stuff. Um, so what I encourage you guys all to do, if you have not yet done so, go to the YouTube channel for Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. uh, Brett mentioned there's a lot of content out there. There's so much content out there about not only the discovery that they made through the filmmaking of these two films, but also, you know, different perspectives and observations and interactions that people have had related to Sasquatch. It's great stuff. And once you do sign up and you subscribe to that stuff, then it kind of filters in. It seems like you're launching new content daily. It
Yeah.
feels like that anyway. So I recommend and request that you guys all do that. And if you got here late and you've not yet done so, please subscribe to this channel and share this with people, because I think it's important for people to have the discourse and have conversation, whether they are skeptical or not. it's important for us to all be able to have conversation about this stuff, because if you're locked into your one perspective, you don't grow, And one
100%.
thing I know about you, buddy, I mean, I've known you 20 years, maybe more now.
At least, yeah, yeah,
You I've seen you in all different facets. I was grateful to see that your director of photography, Mike Ferry, is here, in the chat.
yeah.
In all the facets that I've seen you in, you're really passionate about everything you do, whether it be corporate type stuff or music and culture related, and of course Bigfoot. I think it's really it's important for people to see that kind of passion can put forth greatness in all you do. I'm grateful to our mutual friend Dan Pratt for telling me, man, you know what? If you want to take Bigfoot, you really need to talk to Brett Eichenberger.
I blame Dan for all of this, man. He taught me to be an awesome filmmaker because he is an awesome filmmaker. It's true, and an amazing storyteller.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
probably the most creative and talented guy I know. And I'm not just saying that; it's true. Even if I didn't know you and his name came up, it's 100% true.
Yeah. Well, if people don't know, Dan Pratt is not only the filmmaker and a great video producer with his company Video Media, he's also an inspiring rock star drummer for the band the Dan Reed Network, and he is probably the most compelling reason for me to move to Portland and want to pursue music. And so I owe that and my whole independent side of business ownership to him too. So
Yeah,
here's kudos to Dan Pratt. Kudos to Jill, your partner in crime, with all the work that she's done, and Mike Ferry for being a great DP on the work. If you guys haven't done so, get out there, go to Amazon Prime, find Bigfoot, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and also Bigfoot Paranormal. Both of those Flash of Beauty films done by Brett Eichenberger. I'm grateful for you, man, and for all of you guys there.
you too,
I
Kevin. Yeah,
I Tomorrow's show, the Jeff Beck episode with Jennifer Batten and Jonathan Joseph, is unfortunately postponed a little bit. Got to take care of some family stuff. Mark Ferrari was going to be here on Thursday. If you go to accesskevin.com, you can see all the upcoming episodes and also the past episodes. Great stuff. There's some good Bigfoot material out there too. So go out there and see the conversation I had with Kelly Birdall and Cliff Barackman. And Crypto Cryptid, man, I didn't even get to your questions, but thank you for being here as well. All of you guys, be good humans, man. Be good to each other. Whether you have difference of opinions out there, just hug each other, and hopefully we get through this thing unscathed. Thank you for your time, Brad. It's great to see you, buddy.
thank you, my friend. Really appreciate it, Kevin. Take care of yourself, man.
All right.